Imagine a country where people are so fed up with their government, they actually start asking for a military takeover.
Wow.
That's the reality in Nigeria right now, and it's heartbreaking to see millions of people struggling.
It's a truly desperate situation, and it speaks volumes that this feeling that democracy has failed is so widespread.
Yeah.
Like back in August 2024, there were huge protests across Nigeria,
Right.
driven by the economy and this feeling that no one in power is listening.
And it's not just everyday folks who feel this way.
Mm.
Even former President Obasanjo.
Right.
He led a military government himself way back when.
Yeah.
And now he's saying democracy isn't working in Nigeria.
Exactly. But in the midst of all this doom and gloom, there's another voice out there offering a different perspective.
Atiku Abubakar,
Atiku Abubakar.
right, the former vice president who ran for president this year.
Yeah,
He's got some pretty strong opinions on what's really going wrong in Nigeria.
he does.
He even put out a press release called What We Would Have Done Differently.
Oh, wow.
Bold statement.
Very bold. And what makes Atiku's perspective so valuable is that he's not just some random critic.
Right.
He was the vice president. He knows how this system works inside and out.
He does.
And he's offering concrete alternatives to the current government, the APC.
So we're deep diving into Atiku's critique of the APC.
Yes.
And the policies he's proposing.
Exactly.
The big question is, are these just empty words from a politician, or could they actually mean something for Nigerians who are really struggling right now?
That's what we're going to try to unpack today.
All right, so let's start with how Atiku frames his whole approach to governing.
Okay.
It's interesting how he keeps using this phrase, we would have.
Yeah.
Like he's talking directly to the people.
It's a very powerful way to connect with people.
Yeah.
And there are a few key points that really stand out in his approach.
Okay.
First, he really emphasizes planning and preparation.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but he's basically saying the current government just isn't thinking ahead. Like they're just reacting to one crisis after another instead of preventing them. Exactly. And that leads right into his second point.
Okay.
The need for clear and consistent policies.
Makes sense.
Seems like he's implying that the APC's approach has been chaotic and unpredictable,
Yeah.
which obviously makes it tough for businesses to grow and people to plan for their future.
When you're just trying to put food on the table, the last thing you need is the rules changing all the time.
Absolutely. And Atiku's third point builds on that idea of phased implementation.
Okay.
Realizing that big reforms take time and careful management.
Yeah.
You can't just expect to flip a switch and suddenly everything's fixed.
Makes sense, especially given how complex Nigeria's problems are.
Right.
But what does he mean by leading by example?
That seems to be a dig at how lavish the government is while people are suffering.
Okay.
He's saying that under his leadership, officials would be making sacrifices right alongside everyone else.
So it's about actions speaking louder than words.
Exactly, appealing to that desire for fairness that Nigerians have.
Right.
The idea that everyone's in this together.
From the top to the bottom.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings us to the heart of the matter. What would Atiku actually do differently?
Well, he outlines specific policies in a few key areas.
Cool.
Things that directly impact Nigerians' lives. Security, the economy, infrastructure.
The stuff that keeps people up at night.
Exactly.
Let's dive into those specifics, starting with security.
Okay.
This is a huge issue for so many people in Nigeria.
It is.
What does Atiku actually propose?
He talks about really reforming those security institutions,
Okay.
making sure they have the funding they need,
Right.
and better welfare for the security personnel.
So taking care of the people who are actually out there on the front lines.
Yeah, and using a wider range of strategies, not just focusing on military force, but also diplomacy, intelligence gathering.
Getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly. It's a much more well-rounded approach.
More holistic.
Right, recognizing there's no quick fix to these security issues.
It's complicated stuff.
And again, what makes this so interesting is he's pulling from his experience.
Yeah, it's vice president.
Yeah, he's seen it firsthand.
This isn't just some theoretical stuff.
No, he's offering real ideas based on his understanding of the situation.
And that's got to be reassuring.
I think so, especially for those who are tired of empty promises.
Right, because we've heard it all before.
We have.
So let's shift gears a bit, talk about the economy.
Okay.
So many Nigerians are struggling to make ends meet.
Absolutely. It's a huge issue.
How does Atiku plan to address that?
He's proposing a pretty bold move, a $10 billion economic stimulus fund.
$10 billion.
That's a lot of money.
That's a serious chunk of change. But is it just a handout?
No, there's a strategy behind it.
Okay, what is it?
It's aimed at supporting those small and medium-sized businesses.
The backbone of the economy.
Exactly, the ones that really drive job creation and growth.
Right, but those businesses need people to work for them.
Exactly, and that's where the Skills to Job program comes in.
Okay, so it's about giving people the tools they need.
To actually succeed,
Training education.
yeah, empowering people.
Not just throwing money at the problem.
Right, it's about investing in people.
Investing in the future.
Long-term solutions.
What else is he proposing?
Infrastructure is another big focus.
Like what specifically?
He wants to create an infrastructure development unit
All right.
and set up a huge $25 billion infrastructure development fund.
$25 billion with a B.
It's a massive investment.
So roads, bridges, power grids.
All the essentials.
The stuff that makes a country run.
But it goes deeper than that.
How so?
It's about creating an environment where businesses can thrive.
I see.
Better infrastructure means lower costs for businesses.
Makes sense.
Easier transportation, more reliable power.
Yeah.
When businesses thrive, they create jobs, they generate revenue.
Benefits everyone.
Exactly. It's a long-term vision for economic growth.
Okay, so it's not just about building things. It's about building a foundation for a stronger economy.
Precisely.
Now, I know there's a lot of talk about fuel subsidies these days.
Yeah, it's a hot topic.
Where does Atiku stand on that?
This is where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
He's actually in favor of removing those subsidies.
Which the current government has already started doing.
Right, but he's very critical of how they've gone about it.
So it's not the way, it's the how.
Exactly.
Okay.
He argues that the APC's approach has caused a lot of unnecessary pain.
Especially for everyday Nigerians.
Right, those who can least afford it.
So what would he do differently?
His plan is much more phased.
Okay.
First, he wants to tackle corruption head-on, especially in the oil sector.
Because if there's less corruption, then that money can actually be used to help people
Exactly.
instead of lining someone's pockets.
Right. Then he wants to boost Nigeria's refining capacity.
So the country is less reliant on expensive imports.
Yeah, and only then would he gradually increase fuel prices.
Okay.
But at the same time, he'd put in place strong social safety nets.
To protect the most vulnerable.
Exactly. So it's about making this transition as smooth as possible.
So it's not just about ripping off the Band-Aid.
No, it's about being strategic and compassionate.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
No, what about those foreign exchange rates?
Another big one.
A huge issue for businesses.
It is.
What's Atiku's take?
He wants to move to a managed floating system.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the government would still have some control to help keep the exchange rate stable.
Okay.
But it also allows for some natural fluctuations based on market demand.
So finding that balance.
Exactly, a sweet spot between stability and flexibility.
Right, because businesses need that predictability.
They do wild swings in the exchange rate can be really disruptive.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Atiku's laid out a pretty detailed vision.
He has.
But is it realistic? Can he actually deliver on these promises?
That's the millionaire question.
I mean, we've seen a lot of politicians come and go making big promises. What makes Atiku different?
I mean, Nigeria has a long history of broken promises.
It's true.
So people are understandably cynical. But with Atiku, there's a level of detail here that's different.
Okay.
He's not just giving us these broad goals.
Right.
He's talking about actual mechanisms, funding sources, implementation plans.
He's got a plan.
He does. And it makes you think, okay, maybe he's really thought this through.
So it's not just talk.
It's substance, and that could be a game changer. You know?
Yeah.
It gives people something concrete to hold them accountable to.
Right. It's one thing to say you're going to fix the economy.
Exactly.
But when you start getting into the specifics of how you're going to do it,
But how?
that's when people start to believe that maybe things could actually change.
Right. And I think that's what's resonating with a lot of Nigerians.
Especially the ones who are really struggling.
Absolutely. They're tired of empty words. They want action.
I want to see results.
And Atiku is at least offering a roadmap, a plan to get from point A to point B.
But a plan is just a piece of paper.
True.
What makes you think that he can actually overcome all these massive challenges?
It's true. Nigeria faces huge obstacles.
Corruption, entrenched interests. Just the sheer scale of the problems.
And yet there's something that gives me a glimmer of hope.
Okay, what is it?
Atiku has a track record. He's been there. He's seen it firsthand.
He understands the system.
He does, and he's been talking about these reforms for years.
So this isn't just some political ploy?
No, he's been consistent, and that, combined with his experience and these detailed plans, makes him a credible voice for change.
So there's hope.
There's always hope.
But there are no guarantees.
Of course not. But at least he's giving people something to hold on to.
And that's what's so important right now. Giving
Absolutely.
people a reason to believe that a better future is possible.
Especially after so much hardship and disillusionment.
Exactly. People need something to believe in.
They need hope.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking back to those Nigerians who are so desperate they're calling for a military takeover.
It's heartbreaking.
That things have gotten so bad that that seems like the only option.
It is a sign of how deep that despair runs.
But what I hope people take away from this
Yeah.
is that there are other options, other paths forward.
And Atiku Abubakar is offering one such path.
A vision for a Nigeria where democracy actually works for the people.
Not just for the elites.
And while there are no guarantees, his plans, his genuine concern for the Nigerian people offer a reason to believe that change is possible.
A glimmer of hope in a very dark time.
It's ultimately up to the Nigerian people to decide what happens next.
That's right.
But the stakes are incredibly high. The choices they make in the coming months and years will have a huge impact on millions of lives.
Absolutely.
And that's why this deep dive has been so important.
Mhm.
It's not just about analyzing policies. It's about giving people the information they need to make informed decisions about their future.
Empowering people.
Exactly. We've explored the despair,
Yeah.
the desire for change, and the potential roadmap that APU has laid out. Now it's up to each and every Nigerian to decide what kind of future they want to build.